the first question we have is to prove secant x minus tan x sine x is equal to 1 divided by secant x. Okay, so to start off, we always want to start solving on the harder side because that'll give us more identity to use. Okay, so in our case, we would always want to keep the 1 divided by secant x part the same. Okay, so then we're going to prove the identities on this side. So let's start off by rewriting secant x. So that's the same as 1 over cosine x. Okay. Minus tangent x is another way of, you can write it as sine x divided by cosine x. And then you have a times sine x. Times sine x is equal to 1 divided by secant x. Alright? So we wrote the secant x as 1 over cosine x. The minus tan x sine x, we wrote it as sine x divided by cosine x. So this is the same thing as tangent x. And then times the sine x is equal to 1 divided by secant x. Okay, so next we would want to start simplifying. So this is just a 1 divided by cosine x minus a sine x times sine x is a sine squared x. And then you have a cosine x in the denominator, so it becomes divided by cosine x. Okay, and then again it's equal to 1 over secant x. So we're not changing anything on the right side of the problem. We're using the identities on the left side. Okay? Well, we could have also done it from the left side, but doing it from this side, the right side, excuse me. But this side, what we're doing is much easier. Okay? So now we'd bring these to a common denominator. Okay? So our common denominator is cosine x. So they're both under the same common denominator, so that makes it easier for us. So that's 1 minus sine squared x is equal to 1 divided by secant x. Okay? So remember, we have our identity as cosine square x plus sine square x equals 1. Okay? So if we have 1 minus sine squared x, if we subtract sine squared x from both sides, we'll have cosine squared x. So the top is simply cosine squared x. That's cosine squared x divided by cosine x equal to 1 divided by secant x. Okay? So finally, we could simplify this. So cosine squared x divided by cosine x is simply cosine x is equal to 1 divided by secant x. Okay, so we're almost done. And again, cosine x, you can write it as 1 divided by secant x. So 1 divided by secant x equals 1 divided by secant x. So there we go. It's proved. So the identity is true. So when you're asked to prove an identity, you would do it in this form and show that both sides are equal. Okay, so we'll try one more problem on solving trig identities, and this one's a bit different. However, it's the same concepts, and it might be easier for some of you. So let's start off by deciding what side we want to do the identities on. So first, we'd always want to observe, right? We want to observe which side would be useful to do the identities. Well, looking at the left side here, 1 plus cosine x, there's no identities to use. Like, what identity do you have with 1 plus cosine of x? And sine x. Okay, there's really not much. But on the right-hand side, you have cosecant x and cotangent x. And that gives us a little more leeway on what to do. So, over here, let's start off by rewriting the right side and keeping the left side the same. So 1 plus cosine x divided by sine x equals cosecant x can be written as 1 divided by sine x. Okay? Because remember, cosecant equals 1 divided by sine. Secant is equal to 1 divided by cosine. Okay? And tangent equals sine divided by cosine. and cotangent equals cosine divided by sine. Okay, so these are some important identities that you must remember. Okay, so continuing here, we can write the cotangent x as cosine divided by sine x, cos x divided by sine x. Okay, so now we have to write this in common denominator for the next step. Okay, so we can write 1 plus cosine x divided by sine x equals, so the common denominator in these two is sine x, obviously. So it's sine x divided by, we can rewrite the same because they're already under the same denominator, so 1 plus cosine x. And then we're done because these are the same. Okay, so that's a true identity. Okay, so this is a true identity, meaning that this side of the equation is the same as this side. Okay, so that was proving trig identities. Hopefully we'll have a part 2 coming out very soon. So please subscribe and stay tuned for more updates, and leave a like on this video and share. Okay. I hope to see you guys in the next one. Peace.